Today we're talking sense with Tom Pisello, Chief Evangelist of Mediafly, but better known in the industry as the ROI guy. Who's ready to learn some ROI selling? I am. Let's talk some sense. Welcome to Talking Sense. I'm here with Tom Pisello, Chief Evangelist for Mediafly, but known in the industry as the ROI guy. And you've got two pretty unique titles.
I do.
Today, I'm hoping we can dive in on the ROI guy part, though, if that's
Sounds
all right.
Good. Yeah, it's all about return on investment.
Exactly. And I personally am a huge believer in value-based selling. I know starting off as a first-line seller, I always felt like my biggest competition was do nothing.
Yeah.
So I'm bought in.
Good.
But
Good.
for those...
Well, hopefully everyone else is too, but
if not...
the research doesn't tell us that that's the case, unfortunately.
Really?
So yeah, and I think most sellers know that they're not there at the end of the day to sell a product, that they really want to help the customer out, but they're comfortable selling. Mm-hmm. You know, it's what they were taught to do a lot of times. It's what they were coached to do. So a lot of times they'll come into a meeting with a customer and they'll show up with their PowerPoint. And before that, they had to go through about 60, 80-page deck to get it down to just the slides they want to present. And invariably, it's a story about who the company is, all the great new logos they added, how fast the company's growing. It's about the products that they're there to sell. And not much of it is about the customer that they're there to visit with. And a lot of times that's not because the seller doesn't want to do that, it's because they're comfortable. They were taught all about the company, they were taught all about the products, and they're proud of those things, and they know those things well. They don't know a lot about the customer. And so unfortunately, a lot of these meetings that sales reps have tend to be all about their company, them, their products, the services, and not a lot about the customer, and then not about the outcomes and ultimately the value that can be delivered.
So how do we burn the first call deck with like the globe and the office locations and the, 5 pillars of what we believe in?
I know, and a lot of times as a marketer, you'll set it up where all that stuff is maybe in the back.
So it's
and
my fault?
somehow it gets all the way up to the front.
So this is my fault.
No, it is not. It is not your fault as a marketer, and it's not the fault of the seller either. I think it's just what they tend to be comfortable with. So how do we break them out of their comfort zone is a challenge. And a lot of times that has to do with maybe the tools that we're giving them. Maybe PowerPoint isn't the right tool anymore. Maybe we've got to transcend that. And the way to transcend that is give them tools that a lot of times are much more interactive and a lot more collaborative with the customer. So what we have to do is break them out of this mode of I'm going to show up and throw up to I'm going to show up and we're going to collaborate. We're going to collaborate around the challenges you have and the issues you have. And in fact, I'm going to show up instead of a deck, I'm going to have a diagnostic tool that I'm going to collaborate with you on and ask you a few questions. And based on the answers to those questions, we're going to diagnose you, maybe benchmark you against your competition, maybe score you on your capability maturity in an area. And we're going to both learn a lot more about your challenges. And hopefully I'll help you to uncover some of those and give you new insights that you didn't have. And then based on that, maybe then I'll pivot to, hey, well, to solve that challenge, here's one way you might want to approach it. And here's the value that that might entail. Instead of, here's a product. Does this fit? Oh, here's another product. Does this one fit? And get them to figure out. Instead now, it's almost this diagnostic assessment, this interactive collaboration around challenges and ultimately solutions.
It sounds amazing. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure folks are listening saying, okay, well, what sales methodology is this? How does this fit in? I just read Challenger Sale. We're deploying spin selling or the new strategic selling. Like there's all these methodologies out there that we're training folks on.
And all great and all kind of aimed to help transition sellers from, the show up, throw up, kind of pitch a product to selling more with outcomes and value and more strategically, more prescriptive. So the methodologies are excellent. This is almost that next step of, okay, now that you've got them understanding that they need to change and a methodology and an approach, now they need some content to fuel the engagement. They need a way to change that interaction and that last mile, that moment of truth. And so you've got to go beyond just the methodology and the teaching to now reshape that engagement. So if you have these methods and then you provide them with just the standard PowerPoint, maybe even a PowerPoint that matches that method. So let's say you introduce a challenger type PowerPoint that's more insight focused, it still doesn't create that collaborative and that conversation. So we have to rethink the content to move from content to collaboration.
I think sometimes sales professionals feel they have this limited shot. It's like the Eminem song, that one shot.
You got the one shot.
And they
And
don't.
the statistics bear that out, by the way.
Yeah, and so I'm afraid to take time and ask questions.
But it's the exact opposite. So I agree with you, and I think there's a lot of time pressure that sales reps are under. They've got more accounts than ever. Buyers are spending less time than ever with vendors. And they do feel like they've got one shot. So in that one moment of truth, they're gonna tell you everything that they know about themselves and the products and solutions, and it needs to be actually the opposite. They need to slow down and create an environment for collaboration. Now, in the beginning, you might not get an hour or 2 hours it takes to truly be collaborative and prescriptive. So you kind of have to earn your way up to that. And so you need to be able to do kind of a quick diagnostic or a quick assessment, ask a few questions, and then earn the right to ask more.
I feel like, though, you earn the right through the quality of the questions you ask, which takes data and preparation. Because, again, back to, if I go in, what keeps you up at night? Tell me about your biggest challenges.
Question.
Right? You're kicking me out of your office.
Yeah, exactly. It has to be a very well thought out question set. And that's where, as a sales enablement professional or a content professional, you can't just have salespeople come up with their own set of questions. You need a framework for these questions. And the framework needs to be a well thought out set of Socratic questions that are going to get to the questions the prospect almost needs to be asking themselves. So it's not the general, what's keeping you up at night or what are the challenges. It's the questions around that challenge you already think they have that's going to get you to be able to diagnose how good or bad they are on that particular dimension. And then you go to the next dimension and the next dimension after that.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, so a great example would be a company that we worked with, Okta. Basically, they came up with a prescribed list of challenges that they thought a prospect might have. And the tool starts out right away with, here's a list of challenges that we see at many of the companies we engage with. Rank yourself across these challenges. Do you rate this as a high priority challenge or a low priority challenge? And then you go to the next question and the next question. And then based on the answers to those survey questions, we then compare you to other respondents. So that customer can say, here's where my challenges are. And I'm in financial services. What are other large financial services companies experiencing? So Okta does security and identity management. So some of the questions might be, do you have trouble with prospects calling the help desk asking for password resets or asking for links to lost applications that they can't seem to find anymore? Or are they having trouble because it's taking them too long to go in and authenticate with the system? And so the questions are basically diagnostic and trying to get at the root cause of what they're experiencing and getting them to think about the answers to these. And then based on the answers to those, the sales rep is then presented with a story around why that's such a big challenge and research as to what researchers are saying. So password resets happen to be common, expensive, and a waste of time, because it can be automated. So it gives them an appreciation and a story of why it's such a good issue to address. And then there's a little value calculator so that you can calculate exactly how much that challenge is costing the organization, and with Okta, how much it can save. And then there's case studies of how other people have solved that issue, how much they've saved. So it's a way to kind of get to what are the issues that they should be addressing, and then have a story, a calculator, and some evidence to back it up.
Okay, let's unpack this really quick.
Yeah, I know it's a lot there in that example.
I'm thinking through my budget and what I need to do and how I would even tackle this.
Yeah, as a prospect, you're saying, or as a marketer?
As a marketer.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like if you want to ask good questions, you have to sort of lead the witness.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you do.
So if I'm going to lead the witness, I damn well better have done my research on those personas, understand their pains. So I'm not asking what keeps them up at night.
Exactly.
I kind of already know.
Yep, you do. And so you do have to come in with kind of a challenger point of view. And that's where the challenger got things so right. Customers are not going to be very willing to change. They're very stuck in their legacy solutions or practices, and it's called status quo bias. It's something that we're all innate built into. And to get them to move from status quo, you've got to be disruptive. But the best way to be disruptive is you can provide evidence, you can force someone and shake them and say, look, you got to wake up, you've got this issue. The best way to do it is the Socratic method, where you go in and say, get them to realize they have the issue. All of a sudden you're asking questions and they're like, wow, I'm answering in a way I know is uncomfortable. And all of a sudden they wake up and say, I've got this issue, where they didn't know it before. So how do you come up with those, I think, is the question that you're asking, right?
Yeah. And then, so first of all, I need to have done the appropriate amount of studying on, at an industry level, persona level.
And I'd say first go in without an industry view if you can. Certain times the industries are so different that you sell into that the questions and the roles are going to be very different. But if you can first, to start off easy, start out with the roles of who you engage with. And we do workshops to help customers come up with these diagnostic rubrics and ultimately value tools to go with them. How you do that is you start with the roles. So making sure you know who it is that you're engaging with. And some of it is what are the challenges? What is keeping them up at night? And you've got to know that already. You can't come in asking them. You've got to have a list of these things and then figure out a way to identify which one of those they're actually experiencing. Sometimes it's asking them flat out, are you experiencing this? Is it a priority for you or not? Are you experiencing it or not? Other times it's you come up with a big item like, are you having trouble with password resets? And then you've got to kind of have diagnostics that go off of there that you're not going to ask them the first question. You might ask them 3 detailed questions to get them to realize that they have that challenge. But all of it comes off of who is the role, then what are the challenges that they're having in their business that you could ultimately address, and then what are the key probing questions you can ask to identify whether they have that challenge or not.
Gotcha. And it sounds like in the case of Okta, they've also done a nice job tying that pain to some sort of financial benefit. Exactly. So part of it is you do have to identify and uncover that pain or amplify that pain for them. But then once you have that, then you've got to get into, okay, now that they've identified that pain, how much is it costing them? So what's the cost of doing nothing? And once they realize it's a high cost, that gives them motivation. Yeah. That's the inspiration that Challenger was talking about to break through status quo. That's the disruption. And then once they're disrupted, well, now we got to move them cooperatively towards a solution. Then you introduce your solution and then estimate how much you could ultimately save them and then provide evidence that the savings can actually be realized. I love that. The cost of doing nothing. That's the gold nugget, right? That's what we all need.
And by the way, too soon we jump to the value of the solution, right? So a lot of times sales wants to tell you how much you can save or what the ROI might be. But people aren't necessarily motivated on a neuroscience. And when you look at the economics of decision making and you look at the neuroscience behind it, we're wired to move away from pain a lot more than going towards a gain. And that moving towards a pain, especially early in the decision cycle, moving away from that pain is much more important than moving towards the gain.
So let's talk about, I called it fool's gold earlier when we were chatting, but what you rock in with, you're going to save $5 trillion and quickly you lose your credibility.
Yeah.
So how do you strike that balance between something significant, so they're going to move, and something believable?
Yeah, and there's something we call the Sniff Test.
Yes.
So whatever you come in with has to pass the Sniff Test.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So if you tally up that that they're spending $5 trillion on, this issue, and they're a $5 billion business, there you lose credibility.
Yes.
If you're saying you can save 2,000% ROI, a lot of times it's just not going to pass the sniff test. So there is a range of results ultimately that you're going to have to work on to achieve. And I think the best way to do that is, first of all, you can go in with tools that scale and make sure that you're staying within the ranges. So tools that kind of create guardrails and that they're intelligent enough to make sure those guardrails are in place at all times. The other way is to collaborate. So if we're working together through the diagnostic and we're working together on the business case, on what is the cost of doing nothing, what's the value of change, and we're entering in the numbers together and working together to create a collaborative result, to co-create that result, that's the best way to do it.
So I can see why you're the ROI guy. A lot of great information. What is the ROI of ROI?
Yeah, it tends to be really high because what we're able to do is influence the buyer to make to streamline that buyer's journey that we said has so much friction nowadays. So it's about 800% on the investment, but where does that come from? Well, it comes from accelerating the decision. So where they had to themselves put together maybe a business case and it took a long time to gain consensus, that purchase process internally that could take 12 months or that externally could take 12 months, now we reduce that to 6 months. So now all of your deals in your pipeline are accelerating because they're closing sooner and you're being proactive in these business cases. A big one, less discounting. Think how many times you're in a deal and the only tool you have to get them to approve is lower your cost.
It's not about the cost, right?
It's not about the cost. It's about the value. And if you can prove that and not have it be all about cost, then you can have less discounting. It's about upselling and cross-selling and getting bigger deal size. And ultimately, it's about win rates. And win rates have two dimensions. One is, how many deals in your pipeline are lost to the competition? Well, if you could have a competitive TCO, maybe you can knock a competitor out in those later stages. But more importantly, more of the decisions occur earlier from a competitive advantage standpoint. It's how do you get the customer to not go with you versus a competitor? How do you get them to go with you versus do nothing?
Yes.
Which is what more deals are lost to, 56% according to some studies. So how can we use business value in these diagnostic assessments to get them to understand that this is a priority issue? And there's a huge outcome that can be developed from this that's better than all the other outcomes. And you need to not do nothing and instead say yes.
I love it. I love it. And so I know that you are coming out with a new book. I was really glad to know that it's a lot of pictures.
It's meant for the short attention span theater.
I love it. I love it. But for the even shorter attention span theater that's tuning into Talking Sense, give us the Cliff Notes.
Yeah, it talks about these challenges that are faced with the new buyer and the selling and marketing environment into it, and how you have to have a different approach. And it's a prescriptive approach. It's called evolved selling. And it's a way to evolve selling from pitching products to now selling with value. It's from pitch to purpose. And essentially, evolved selling has 4 dimensions to it. It's how do you get your content to be more inspirational, number 1. Second, it's how do you get that content organized for the sales rep and get it to be dynamic so that the sales rep can be more influential. The third is interactive. How do you get your content to be interactive? A lot of the tools we talk about best practices, a lot of great examples in the book. And then finally, how do you tune it all with intelligence? How do you understand what content and score the content in terms of how it's driving outcomes? How the usage is, how the consumption is, how the outcomes are in the context, to then use artificial intelligence to recommend the right content and to invest in the right content. And how do you use all of this to ultimately reshape the last mile? So it's not about pitching products, it's about that purpose and the engagement.
So at 6 Sense, ABM is our jam.
Yeah.
Account-based marketing. But we talk about account-based orchestration. And the reason for that is because we believe it's not just marketing's job. Mm-hmm. It's
Absolutely.
Marketing, sales, customer success.
Yeah, it's all these nonlinear touch points with the customer. The buyer's journey is nonlinear too. I mean, we simplified it for our discussion here, but there's a lot of complexity in it, and there is a lot of orchestration to occur.
So how as a CMO, How do we fit into your evolved selling journey and ABM?
Yeah, one example of it is we had a customer, Coupa. They do procurement management solutions. How do you buy better? And they can save companies a ton of money, but it was hard for them to get the word out to all of the customers that were kind of touching them and hitting them. So what they did was, based on account-based profiles, they're able to take a small little understanding about each customer. So they targeted a certain group of customers to target that month. Let's say it was financial services companies, and it was a certain role within those financial services companies. And with just a little bit of profile information about each company, they were able to proactively create a pro forma ROI analysis for them, value analysis. Right. And then they target out 200 reports that month, 200 the next month, 300 the month after. They send it to the prospect, and they also give a copy to the sales rep. And so now the prospect is primed with a piece of personalized content that's like, here's what, did you realize you're wasting this much potentially in procurement? And here's what Coupa can do for you. And then the sales rep, instead of coming in with a pitch deck, they're coming in with the report that says, here's what our pro forma says. Can I collaborate with you on putting together a case? Because this seems compelling to me.
Perfect. So it's using data to really orchestrate the dance between marketing and sales.
Who are we going to target? What are the roles? Who exactly should it be? And then what's their profile? And then come in and say, here's a piece of content that we think is going to inspire you to take the next step.
So let's change gears just for a second. Mm-hmm. I love to talk about entrepreneurship. I have a huge affinity and place in my heart for entrepreneurs.
The crazies that we are.
You guys are crazy. But Namascray. The cray in me appreciates the cray in you.
There you go.
Namascray. So tell me about founding Alinea. How did you build this amazing company from absolutely nothing?
Yeah, it was a follow-on to a company that created as my first company. It's a company called Interpose back in the day. And I was a product manager. I had a product line that I was managing. I had a new enterprise sales force, all new hires. And it was a new enterprise product line. We had never had to target CIOs before. We never had to target CFOs within a business. And now all of a sudden I got a new sales force, a new product, and a new strategy. How the heck was I going to execute on this? I had come up with a diagnostic tool that would go out and analyze and discover. So it was a smart tool. It would go out and discover what the storage profile was in the network. And then it would take that information and tell you how old your storage was and how much you were wasting of keeping all this on hard disks, and how using a hierarchical approach, an information lifecycle management approach, you could put it on less expensive storage, move it off of primary to secondary, etc. The details aren't important, but it was a diagnostic and it was a value tool. And it turns out that diagnostic value tool was more popular than the product I was trying to sell. Happened to be from a mentor of mine, so I loved him and I loved the product, but I knew I was onto something with this kind of a diagnostic collaborative approach with a customer. And so I started a company doing that and had the pleasure of exiting on that to Gartner, and then was an analyst at Gartner. And Alinea was a follow-on to that. When the tech bubble burst, the need for this kind of solution became really important. Everyone became very frugal. We called it frugalnomics, very economic focused, and you had to cost justify solutions in if you were going to get any of that scarce budget spent on your solutions. So it really was born from my own need as within an organization. I started the work within the organization, then I was able to, they permitted me to take that out and try to commercialize it.
It's always hard to know when to sell, know when to hold them and know when to fold them, so to speak. As an entrepreneur, I think that's a really tough decision and call.
Yeah, I never think of it in terms of folding it. I almost think of it like raising a child. A child needs a founder's love and milk. And there's a book that has that in it. I'm escaping the name of the exact book. But basically, as a child, when the child does grow up, they need to spread their wings. And so a lot of times I view my entrepreneurial endeavors that way. As a founder, I'm there to provide the love, and the milk is kind of the capital and the fuel and everything for it to grow. But after a certain amount of time, it needs to you need to give it freedom. It needs to take on a life of its own, and it needs to grow. And so for me as an entrepreneur, I'm much better at early stage, and I realize that. I'm not good at managing big teams. I'm much more the thought leader and the innovator. And so for me, it's how do I find a good home for it? And the first home at Gartner was excellent. This time around, we took the niche of ROI tools and these interactive tools and now plugged it into this incredibly hot sales enablement space. And so that market is ready to take off a lot more than the niche market that I was in. And so it's time to give that child of a Linian its wings to go on and do bigger and better things. But still stay involved. Obviously, as a parent, you never let your parent go. In fact, I'm a pretty good helicopter parent.
Perfect. So the next wave, you're still the ROI guy.
Absolutely.
But you're the chief evangelist at Mediafly.
Correct.
And what does that entail?
Yeah, that entails basically preaching the thoughts around this new methodology of evolved selling, and really gives me a much bigger platform to be able to do that. So it's about getting these new practices out, combining what we did in interactive and in value with the core of how do you get salespeople to know what to use next, and how do you have this great intelligence system integrated into CRM. And so we're combining both of those strengths into this new method and new approach, along with a much more robust product line.
Tom, amazing to have you today. Thank you for all of those insights, and I can't wait to have you back.